Obviously we've mentioned your father and your grandfather already, but how involved were they with you with when it came to the racing career? I think I read somewhere that you actually started out by driving one of your dad's old cars in
Yeah.
some races. But in terms of the actual like advice and mentorship, how important were they in your kind of early formative years in racing, and what was the best piece of advice that each of them gave you? Would you say?
So, and that's a really good question because it's not a single piece of advice. And I always tell people that it's not that they gave you that one golden nugget that I was like, oh yeah, I'm always going to remember that one. That's the one that's going to get me through. It's that when I turned 12 and they taught me how to weld, and I had always hung out at the race shop. Then they let me work on the car. They let me pack wheel bearings. They let me bolt things together. They let me do different things, and I had to work. I was and I wanted to work. I worked in each department at our shop, at the race shop for a year. So I worked in the body shop for a year. I worked in the engine shop for a year. I worked in the transmission and gear part of the shop for a year. I worked as just a mechanic for a year. And by that time, you get to be 17, 18 years old. And that's when I wanted to drive. So I had learned so much just by being around my grandfather and around my dad and going to 36, 37 races a year, week in and week out, and working on crash cars, working on new cars, being on pit crews, watching what he did in certain situations, listening to them on the radios, on the headsets, the communication between driver and crew chief, that a lot of it, it was just there. You know what I mean? It was just there. I learned it through osmosis, I think. But there were questions, and we would go to different racetracks, like when we went to Daytona, and I would ask, where's the best place to pass? How do you get, what about these bumps down here in turns one or two? Do you go in high? Do you go in low? How do you set somebody up here? How do you use the draft? So there were those little things that he would teach me. My grandfather had been out of the sport for so long. All he said was, hammer down, turn left, and don't let anybody get in your way, man. Just run through them if you have to. That was their motto from the 50s. You know what I mean? But the sport had changed a lot by the 60s, and by the time I came along in the late 70s, and then raced through the 80s and the 90s and into the early 2000s, it was a totally different game. So I think you just learn a lot just from watching.
Yeah, it's really interesting you mentioned that. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of Graham Hill, the ex Formula One and Indy 500, the only man to get the Triple Crown, which I always remind people when I
Yes.
can. He was the guy that understood everything about his car. I mean, obviously, times have changed so much. Formula One cars, for example, are so much more complicated than they used to be. But he was the guy that could actually, go in and actually repair his car. He knew what
Yes.
was wrong with it before actually going into the garage. He used to do it himself. So getting that getting that hands-on experience sounds like it was extremely important for you.
Yeah, it was. And and listen, I know the sport has changed. I know the sport has changed. And I know it is so much more technical, from IndyCar racing to Formula One to NASCAR. To and in America, we have so many local short half-mile racetracks, quarter-mile racetracks where people run. And I know that sport's changed too. But at the same time, my dad, one of the and if you say a piece of advice, he always said, if something happens, be able to tell your crew what broke, what happened, how diagnose it before you get there. Because if you just roll in and say, looks like it broke, they have no idea where to start. Do they start in the engine? Do they start in the transmission? Is it a wheel bearing? What's going wrong? I don't know, man. Just broke. So if you have that a little bit of mechanical knowledge, then it was easier to point that out. And I still believe that. I still believe some of these kids, and some of these guys that drive, that do have that little bit of experience and that little bit of knowledge, they're a lot better race car drivers in the long run than what the other guys are. Although there are exceptions, like Kyle Larson, who is just knows nothing about a race car mechanically. But I mean, I'm telling you, man, he is a generational talent. He is a phenomenal talent for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been seriously impressed with him this year. I don't know how I think he's only got 3 or 4 wins this year. It seems like
Yes.
he's got way more, just with the way he's been driving. He's always been in the mix. And the fact as well that he, attempted to do double duty and, did a decent job in the Indy 500 as well, just shows how talented he is. I can't believe people can go and just swap between the two. It's
Yeah.
something else.
So listen, you talk about Graham Hill, and and I talk about in the same way you talk about an AJ Foyt or Mario Andretti, those a Dan Gurney, just a driver who rises above everyone else, like a Graham Hill, who rises above and is so versatile, can do anything, anytime, anywhere. If it's got a steering wheel and 4 tires, they can drive it and they can be competitive and they can win in it. And that's a rare place to be when you really start looking across the board of all the drivers that have come and all the drivers that have gone, and all the drivers that are here now. You get down in the small numbers, 5, 10, maybe 15 worldwide, who have been able to do stuff like that. So that's pretty phenomenal for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, the likes of Montoya, the likes of Alonso over the years as well
Yeah,
to do what they've done. I'd love to see Alonso have another crack at the Indy 500.
for sure.
Yeah, definitely. If you wanna hear more from us, you can head over to NASCARchronicle.com. You can find us on the usual social channels, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, on all of those, and of course our Microsoft Start account too. And who do you want to see us interview next here on 5 Minutes With? Just let us know in the comments below for any suggestions. I can't promise it'll be as good as Kyle, but I will do my best to make that happen. See you for the next one, guys.